Good evening, everyone. We begin the Reid Out tonight with Republicans just tying themselves into pretzels to point the finger at every single thing but the problem, the gun, in the wake of the murders of 19 fourth graders and 2 of their teachers in Uvalde, Texas. From mental health to arming teachers to more armed law enforcement in schools, every single thing except making it harder to buy weapons of war. Now, I'd like you to think about that because this whole conversation defies logic. And you know what? It's actually insulting. But you know what? In fairness, let's just take a moment to step back and think about each of their arguments and whether that is the environment that you want or that they'd want for their children. Let's start with mental health. As far as we know, there was no mental health issue with the individual who stole the futures of 19 children in Uvalde, Texas. Governor Greg Abbott even said it himself before he contradicted himself.
There was no known mental health history of the gunman. We have a problem with mental health illness in this community.
Okay, Greg Abbott, you flipped it around and now you say that mental health was the problem. Okay. Yet NBC News reports that Abbott slashed more than $200 million from the department overseeing mental health programs in a state that is already dead last in the country for access to mental health care. Abbott certainly hasn't approached providing mental health services with the same zeal as making sure that every Texan who wants to carry a gun can do so anywhere at any time. Just last year, he went to the Alamo, to sign 7 new gun rights laws, including one allowing so-called constitutional carry, allowing Texans to carry a handgun in public without a permit or the background check and training Texas used to require. While that law does have prohibitions for people with adjudicated mental health issues, in 2017, Donald Trump, as president, actually made it easier for those with mental health issues to purchase guns, revoking an Obama-era rule regarding background checks. So Republicans haven't exactly walked the walk there. Then there's the argument number two. Here is Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton.
We can potentially arm and prepare and train teachers and other administrators to respond quickly, because the reality is we don't have the resources to have law enforcement at every school.
Really, Ken? You sure about that? Because we've just been through a whole season of Republicans screaming about how they don't trust teachers, and teachers need to be monitored for suspicious activities, including in Texas. Republicans have legally limited how teachers can teach about things like race and slavery under the boogeyman of critical race theory. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick wants his own version of Ron DeSantis' Don't Say Gay law in Texas. So you can't trust teachers to speak to your kids about race or gender or sexuality, but you want them to meet an AR-15 with equal force? Well, if you want them to do that, you're going to have to ask them to fire this.
Get into a good forward body lean.
Imagine that weapon in a classroom with your 5th grader. And if trained law enforcement officers have failed to stop mass shooters, what makes you think Miss Sally can do it? And then there's this gem that we've heard for a decade that came directly from the NRA itself after Sandy Hook.
The only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun.
Now, the right would like you to think that if only there were additional armed security there, then the problem will be solved. But history tells us something quite different. Start with Columbine, where there was actually an armed security guard on the campus when the shooting happened, and still 13 high school kids and adults were killed and 20 injured. At the Parkland school shooting in Florida, there was an armed security officer who failed to even enter the school when he heard the shots fired. And earlier this month in Buffalo, the security guard at the Top supermarket, Aaron Slater, did engage the killer, but his shots failed to penetrate the armored vest of the gunman. Slater was killed when the gunman returned fire. He was buried just yesterday. And at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, there remain a number of questions about security. The school district had doubled its security budget into the millions in recent years. It actually had its own police force. But while officials initially said that an armed resource officer did engage the gunman, today we learned that didn't happen. And an officer may not have even been present.
Was there a school officer on campus, and was that school officer armed? Because that's what we've been told.
So at this time, no.
No, there was not an officer readily available armed. No.
Was there an officer?
No, nothing. I can't answer that yet.
Okay, another question. Why did almost an hour elapse before police were able to shoot and kill the gunman? And could anything have been done sooner to prevent at least some of the carnage? What we do know is that it was long enough for parents to arrive on scene, pleading with police officers to go in and save their children. You can hear them screaming, begging officers to help. NBC News has not confirmed precisely at what point this occurred or what actions law enforcement officers had already taken by that time. But the Associated Press reports that one parent who lost his daughter, says that authorities were unprepared and not moving quickly enough. That parent even raised the idea of charging into the school with several other bystanders. Another parent told the Wall Street Journal that she was temporarily handcuffed and almost arrested for supposedly interfering with the crime scene. She said she saw a father tackled and thrown to the ground by police, and a third pepper sprayed. Each of them just wanted to see their kids alive again. Meanwhile, authorities, the good guys with the guns, remain painfully short on answers. Joining me now is NBC News senior national correspondent Kerry Sanders in Uvalde, and Donnell Harvin, senior policy researcher at the Rand Corporation, former chief of Homeland Security and Intelligence for Washington, D.C., and first responder to the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting and the 9/11 attack on the World Trade Center. Quite a resume. Thank you both for being here. Kerry, my friend, long time no see. Unfortunately, when I get to see you, it's in awful circumstances like these. We need to do better on that. You were at that press conference today. So can you try to unpack for us and explain how it could be that apparently this shooter, this gunman, was inside this Uvalde school for an hour?
Yeah, it was a news conference that left a lot to understand because it really raised more questions than it answered. First of all, let's talk a little bit about some NBC News reporting. We have, up until this point, been under the belief that all the children were in a classroom that was sort of a shared classroom with two teachers. I take it was some sort of partition in the middle that could open or close. But now my colleagues Pete Williams and Jonathan Dienst have said that their sources within Texas are reporting that there were victims in 4 classrooms, which suggests that the gunman was moving through the school rather than, as we were told, down a hallway, down another hallway, and then barricading himself into that one shared classroom, as it were. The news conference raised several questions really about the timeline. So at 11:28, the gunman in a stolen pickup truck crashes into a ditch, gets out, and witnesses in the area initially believe somebody's been into a car accident. Let me go over and help. The gunman gets out of the passenger side. He has a bag, which we now know had ammunition in it, and a long gun, which we now believe was some sort of AR-15 type weapon, and he begins shooting. So those people skedaddle. Somebody dials 911. In the process, he goes over the fence. Now, a 911 call's made it around 11:30. There's a 10-minute period where he is getting over the fence, getting onto the school grounds, and finding an open door. The police department is 1.2 miles from here. Even if you were driving the speed limit and doing all of the stop signs, it would only take 5 minutes. And of course, if you're a police officer with sirens running, you'd be here within moments. The gunman gets inside, and this is where it gets a little unclear now, because we were told that he goes down one 20-step direction, and he gets into one classroom. But now we know there were at least 2 other classrooms where victims were found. He barricades himself in there at one point, and this is really the most critical question. You have the officers that are in there. As you just mentioned, Joy, there's people outside here. They're screaming. They're asking the authorities to let them in. They want the officers to go in. Why are they outside? And this 1-hour period passes. Now, during this 1-hour period, we don't know why the officers did not attempt to go in, why they didn't breach if they didn't have the equipment, why they didn't call for help, like from the fire department. Fire departments breach every day. That's what they do. They get people out of mangled cars. They get people out of houses where doors are locked and they can't get in there because of fires. They know how to do that sort of stuff. They don't do that. But what they do is they have this 1-hour period. Now, I was told at the news conference, because he used a word, he said, well, we were negotiating. So I said, okay, I need to understand what was going on. Was he responding to the negotiation? No response, which suggests to me that calling it a negotiation is the wrong word. You're negotiating when you have a conversation, even if it's a response. So there was no response, no negotiation. And then we have this 1 hour period where the officers are outside, and the families that I've spoken to, the residents who I've spoken to, the people who are here are now wondering, maybe my child was alive. Maybe if they had gone in, at least some of the children would have been saved.
Right.
We know of at least one child who was playing dead, laying on top of her friend who had also been shot but was still breathing. But in that 1 hour period, and folks in EMS call it the golden hour, in that 1 hour period, when they finally got her out and rushed her to the hospital, she had died. And so there are so many questions, Joy, from parents who want to say, what was going on in that hour? Why weren't you going in? And why wasn't there an attempt to figure out an alternative approach? It wasn't until the Border Patrol team arrived, got the key, went in from the administrator, the principal, opened the key to the door, and then got in. That key was available for that 1 hour. And the other big question is, and we saw this in Parkland, because, as you know, the officer there, Deputy Scott Peterson, he didn't even go in. He stayed outside. But we do know that when they were looking for the gunman, they did a quick review of the security cameras to see where the gunman had gone. They have security here. They have those cameras. From what we understand, nobody did any sort of review to try to determine what was going on, where the movements were, just that there was somebody inside. The one thing that the DPS did say is, in that hour period, the initial gunfire all happened in the first period. There was later gunfire, but not as rapid as at the first. But that does not explain who was killed at what time, and more importantly, who might have been saved if the officers had somehow figured a way to at least attempt an entry into that room to take out this gunman. Joy?
Extraordinary. Just absolutely extraordinary reporting, and hard to believe. Carrie Sanders, wow. Thank you. Thank you, my friend. I really appreciate you. Let me bring you in, Donnell Harvin.